It has been quite an effort to get Dr. Boshart on the show again because she just had too much going on. I was not aware just how much was actually going on. As we talk about the intervening period, realization slowly dawns, and the dawning doesn't reveal a pretty landscape. Dr. Boshart is best placed to tell this story, and so I will leave the rest to her. There is an interesting side story developing with this podcast, which potentially combines Dr. Boshart's tale with a community in the US called Council Bluffs. I would love for anybody from Council Bluffs who has heard Dr. Boshart's first episode and spread the word of it to their friends to contact me. You have my gratitude. Two on a mic, clocking out. Enjoy.
Dung weche pek kod welo mabiro etu under mic. Dung parodit kod jok mawuoye etu under mic. Seche tin sud buta wawinji etu under mic. Ola wachokre wabed piny bi wawinje ero chako moment ndi and a podcast makende.
I'm joined by Dr. Boshart for a second time, and I'm tempted to say by popular demand. Dr. Boshart, how are you?
I am having a beautiful day. I'm well, thank you.
Very good. We are here unseasonably warm in Berlin. I know that in the North of America things are not always quite the same, but how's it going there?
We had a really beautiful day today. The sun was shining most of the day. We're at like 6 degrees Celsius. There's no sign of snow, which makes me sad because when I grew up in this town, February was always very white and very snowy, and we would toboggan and ice skate and winter ski, and I'm sad my daughter isn't able to enjoy those things this winter because there just isn't any snow. So, yeah.
Yep. The telltale signs of climate change. I mean, it's Berlin at the end of February and 10 o'clock at night, and it's only 8 degrees here. People who I know who have been skiing have told me that in the Alps there's no snow. So, yeah, unfortunately, these changes are quite consistent, it seems, in many places.
I don't know if I told you my last time we spoke that my father's side of the family is ancestrally from Germany, and I do have intentions to go there sometime in my life because it would be very interesting.
If you ever pass by Berlin, let me know. Yeah, there's at least a coffee with your name on it. So yeah, it will be a pleasure to meet you. Yeah, but since we last spoke, as you said, a lot has happened, and people may not have heard the first episode, which I will put a link into the notes for this one as well. Do you want to just quickly let people know exactly what it is that you do?
Yeah, sure. I am a family physician or general practitioner. I don't know what you call it there, by trade. So a doctor, family doctor by trade, trained in that practice. So I for the last 8 years have been qualified to practice, but my entire intention of going into medicine was to service First Nations, or Indigenous is a key word these days. Don't love the word so much just because it's this blanket statement and all of our nations are so diverse, but the intention of me practicing medicine was to service my first local community, First Nations or Anishinaabe community. And I didn't realize that, the systems as they exist in Canada aren't quite set up to service that community. And I think deliberately aren't set up, they're sort of set up to leave that community out. So it's been a very challenging 8 years to try to practice medicine in a good way in that community because there's so many barriers and it has been quite a shit show for lack of a better better explanation. But what I've come to realize is, if you are identifying as an Indigenous person and you're a doctor, you only really have one choice, which is assimilate into the current system, accept it, and start practicing, and don't ask questions, and don't. If you want an easy life, just do that. Which means you probably you'll spend the majority of your practice seeing non-Indigenous people, and you might come across some Indigenous people, but I'm not happy with that. So I basically refused since I started to do that. And so the whole journey has just been trying to find a space that exists where First Nations are practicing healthcare, like sort of in a sovereign way or independent way, where I can learn and work, which I haven't found yet, or create my own space, which I actually recently did. And so I can share a little bit about that and where we are now. And then all the layers of that, right? Attempting to deliver healthcare to any human being is like a gigantic, it's not just about a cough or a wound or a blood pressure. Like it's fully integrates everything about that person, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically, socially. And so family practice is really one where you get that opportunity to sort of look at someone, get to know them, and know their whole context, and how we can sort of assist in all of those domains to get them to a better quality of life, or a more enjoyable state. That's the whole point in my eyes.
Yeah, and just so that people know, the last time that we spoke, you also mentioned that you kind of took your requests, as it were, to the highest medical authority within the region. It's not that you kind of sat back and gossip with some of your patients. Oh, this is not very good, blah blah blah.
Right.
But you've been very active in trying to get not only funding, but also develop awareness of some of the issues which are faced by First Nations communities where you are, and also to try to get support. And I mean, to be fair, you've also mentioned that there have been other doctors that have come along the journey with you too. So it's not that you are completely alone in this. But as you say, the system itself is not there for you to provide the kind of healthcare that you want for your community. I believe that was where we were when we spoke last time.
Yes. Yeah. So that sort of remains the truth. And it's like with every chapter of my life, it's like new learning about how it doesn't work. And I appreciate that learning, because then, through knowing what doesn't work, then we can maybe understand better what will work. But I'm sort of tired of having experiences and having to see what doesn't work over and over. So I set off early this year in this quest to what does it look like? How does it work? What is First Nation or Indigenous healthcare? What does that look like from that worldview, right? Because I live in these two worldviews, the more mainstream, settler sort of colonial worldview, and then the First Nation or Anishinaabe. And I use all these words because First Nation Anishinaabe worldview is how we would say it as Anishinaabe people, but the worldviews are just totally opposite, right? So then I had to just ask myself, well, everyone said, well, what does it look like, right? And I'm like, everyone wants an answer. I don't really know, but all I know is that, it starts with relationships, building relationships with my patients, and they sort of lead how it looks. So if you're really centering on patient care, and they truly are at the center of that, then we adapt to meet their needs rather than them having to adapt to the system, right? So June 21st, which I don't know in your area if you celebrate in any way, but in our neck of the woods, June 21st is National Solidarity Day, or Indigenous Peoples Day, the government has called it. And it's also like the solstice. But on that day, I met a man at a gathering who is from Wikwemikong First Nation. And he just happened to be standing with a friend of mine at the gathering. It was like a powwow type gathering. So I walked up and introduced myself because he was with a friend of mine, and we started chatting. And it turns out that this man was a executive director of a social service sort of agency in the urban area for First Nations people. And through that sort of fateful meeting, we got chatting. We had several meetings after that, and he and I realized that our sort of our goals were aligned in terms of healthcare, but that agency didn't have a healthcare branch. It was all like housing and anti-human trafficking, homelessness. Like they were supporting a lot of urban First Nation folks in the city in those ways, but they did not have healthcare. And he was noticing that that was the big like block in the road for people to actually get well and like move forward, is like they didn't have that healthcare piece. So in that good way, in that Anishinaabe way, he said, okay, Dr. Boshart, I'm going to give you a budget, and I'm going to trust you that you know what our people need and you know what you're doing, and I'm going to hand it to you. And I just want you to make a team and get what you need and see our people in this downtown urban setting. And it was just the most terrifying few months because I've always just walked into a clinic and like everything's there. You get your space, you get your computer, you just start seeing people, and there's all these things already established, right? So it was pretty terrifying, but I had enough of a budget for me for myself to pay myself a salary for 16 hours a week. And then I hired a nurse for 16 hours, and I hired a full-time medical administrative staff. We got like all of our electronics, like computers, laptops, phones, through the organization. We set up everything from the back end to the front end. And we were actually operating out of a shelter downtown. And it was like really amazing, because how it works is very simple. Like someone's referred to you, usually who's staying at the shelter for any reason. You meet that person and you just start a journey with them. And like basically whatever their needs were, we met them. I happen to just be the kind of person that doesn't mind sharing my number with all of the staff at the shelter. So I was pretty much on call as needed. And, very, very complex, medical needs. Some of the individuals that I met when we first started, like I didn't know if they would live. Like the next day, I was often going to bed thinking, I don't know if they're going to make it, because they had just such severe addictions and mental health, and like layered on top of chronic diseases that weren't being managed, or infections in their wounds, and the emergency room would just kick them out because of behavior problems. So like they just had nowhere to go other than me. So it was quite terrifying in the beginning. But the beautiful thing is, because we show up and we did it in that good way, we had tea and coffee always going, offering people tea and coffee. It was kind of, our space almost looked like a living room. We could visit We did have private space for like anything private, of course, but it was just that relationship building, getting to know these people, letting them sort of lead the healthcare, but being able to sort of break everything down and really get down to what we needed to do. And we were able to move so many people along this spectrum of like, you know, acutely psychotic, borderline metabolically, so physical decompensation, like to some sort of stability within like 2 months. And some people were even housed. We got their housing application. We got them housed. We got them stable. Like it was beautiful, and we were doing great. And then what happened? The man who I spoke of, who I met on that fateful day, was let go by the organization. And this is a nonprofit, so he was the executive director, but there's a board, I guess, that sits at that. So the board let him go for unknown reasons. And as soon as he was gone, I started to realize that like I was next, because there was a lot of interference with my work. Like that top down sort of, you can't do this, you can't do this. And then eventually it was, the board has decided that you guys can't provide healthcare here anymore. And we actually just got terminated, all of us, last week. And we're going to clean the clinic out tomorrow. So, dun, dun, dun.
Oh
yeah.
That's terrible.
Isn't it? Yeah.
I'm really sorry to hear that, Dr. Boshart. I imagine that's also an emotional bag to carry as well. And I'm sure you're emotionally connected to the people that would come in there and who are dependent upon your doors being opened.
Oh my gosh, yes. It's been like, I knew it was coming. I saw it coming before it happened, so I was more prepared. But so I've been through the whole emotion of it, and you know, the reasons behind the decision or the reasons that were communicated to me. And the board didn't communicate to me at all this entire journey. I don't even know who they are. But they would send the directors of the organization to talk to me. But at the end of the day, like, they did not approach me on one occasion to ask if they had any concerns. I wasn't asked to address it. So they basically just sat in these meetings with all these worries and fears about standards of care, insurance, liability, health information privacy, which are reasonable concerns, fair, like, but I had all of that covered, like, but they didn't ask me. So I don't know, at the end of the day, if they really wanted us, they would have asked. I could have clarified and it would have been okay, but I think those were just all like excuses to just shut us all down because they just didn't want to deal with it. But honestly, I don't know if I'll never really know the reason.
I mean, has this story not received any local media attention? I find it odd that such a service can be provided, and then for it to be taken away and nothing reported, that sounds equally shocking in many ways.
Yeah, I don't even know, you know, not a lot of people, I guess, in a broader context, like, knew what we were doing in there. It was really only the staff and us and our patients, that some other physicians that I would refer to or we would share knew that I was there. But I think it just came and went so quickly that there wasn't any real, there wasn't really any media interest or pickup. I did get asked to do an interview for CBC Radio in Canada on this show called White Coat, Black Art, or I think that's how, or black coat, white coat, I don't remember, whatever makes the most sense, about the homelessness issue and the health and homelessness that we were providing in that space. But then I said, sure, I'll do that interview, but then I never heard anything back. And I'll share, like, this is all my like feeling and opinion, and it could totally be off base, but I always have these like deep underlying sort of like knowings that somehow it's political, and the politics of Indigenous health are interesting in this region, because there is, and I don't know if I mentioned this, there's like one sort of provincial body that the province funnels all its money to as the sort of Indigenous health service provider. That agency is very much local here, and they have a clinic in the city where I was working, and I have some suspicion that at that board level, that agency that does do all of the Indigenous healthcare, I think said, you guys should get out of healthcare because we're the ones that do the healthcare for the Indigenous people. You need to shut her down, right? And I know that's like, everyone says, no, that's not it. But like, I know that there's a lot of people invested in that other model that has been in this area for 25 years. There's a lot of money going into that model. And it does benefit the communities to some capacity. But to be honest, when I was in that space working with those people, all those people, or most of them, were patients of that model. Right? But they couldn't get access in the way that they needed. And it hadn't been helpful to that point. Because it is so much like, we're open 8:30 to 4:30. And when you call, it's like a recorded voice, press this button, I can't get through to anybody, or, I can't make it to my appointment. And you get, it's that whole model that is more common, that the colonial health model, it doesn't work for people in certain kinds of situations. So, and the physicians that work with them are not First Nations people. I don't know how well they understand or how well they interact. I know they do their best to train their staff, but nothing is better than lived experience, right? It's like training someone is, I don't know. You can try, but the worldview and the way we relate to people, I don't think it can be trained. So it's just tough. So anyway, so right now, where am I at? I'm going to clean out my clinic tomorrow with the nurse, and we no longer have a space to practice out of. But I guess the silver lining is that we do have other partnerships with healthcare organizations and providers locally who know all of this and want to help and want to get us a space and want to continue the work. So it's just how that's going to come together. I don't quite know at this moment.
In Europe, obviously, there are a number of different healthcare solutions, depending on which country you live in. The UK rather famously has this organization called the National Health Service, which up until at least recently, even now, is supposed to be able to provide free healthcare to anybody who qualifies as either a British citizen or a resident within the UK. And they would receive medical treatment, no questions asked, essentially. Now that is kind of being torn apart by the current Conservative government, but that's politics and so on. But people always compare that kind of system with essentially what exists in the USA. I am completely ignorant as to the level of healthcare provision provided by Canadian services, if indeed you don't have private healthcare. Can you give us a bit of a kind of explanation as to what kind of service there is to your normal, I suppose, any person that walks in off the street in a major Canadian city, and then perhaps compare that to the experience that First Nations people may indeed get if they don't reside within that kind of urban environment?
Yeah, I mean, Canada is touted as having this great public health. And it is true to some extent. So, if you're a Canadian citizen and you have a health card, what that means is that you should have access in an emergency situation. You can go to one of the hospitals and seek out care, and you'll be cared for. And as long as your OHIP card is active, they foot the bill for everything. Now, in terms of like pharmaceuticals or medication prescriptions, those things aren't covered by publicly funded programs unless you're above a certain age, or you qualify for disability, or you're on Ontario Works. Like, you could get some drug coverage, but if you're a working person, you pay for all your own drugs, or you pay for it's covered through work insurances. The public system doesn't normally cover things like extended health care unless you have insurance. So like massages or physiotherapy or special devices are all sort of extra that you'd have to pay out of pocket. Now, in a perfect world, or maybe when I was a kid, it seemed like it was that way. Family medicine, same thing. Your family physician, will pretty much provide all the services you need at no cost, although there are things that aren't covered, which will come out of pocket, and things like letters for school or work, any kind of paperwork you need completed sometimes is out of pocket, or certain treatments aren't covered by OHIP. Like if you have skin tags or something they consider cosmetic, you have to pay out of pocket for. But currently in Canada, we have a huge problem with family medicine. It is very difficult to find a family doctor. A lot of people are without family doctors right now, which of course overwhelms the emergency room systems. The hospital system is quite overwhelmed right now. There just aren't enough providers to meet the demands of the population currently. And private healthcare does exist in Canada, even though as a country, I think we try to fight against it, but there are private clinics popping up, like particularly like nurse practitioner led private clinics. So not physicians, but nurse practitioners are like registered nurses that do like an extra year or two of training, and they are called nurse practitioners, and they can write prescriptions and order tests, and they can do at least all of the administrative things that physicians can do. So I think the difference, First Nations people have access to all of that too. It's not that we don't. If you can get there and you can walk in, technically you are eligible for all of that, just like everybody else. And a lot of the barriers are obviously there aren't any acute care or hospitals or anything in First Nations communities. So if you want to get to one, you have to call the ambulance, or you have to have a car, or you have to have enough money for a cab, or you got to have a family member or someone to get you to the hospital, which some people inherently think should be simple. But, sometimes people don't even have a landline or a cell phone, and the cellular service in the First Nations is terrible. So it becomes like these other kinds of barriers that most people generally don't have. And then once you walk into the space, there's all the barriers around racism. If you look outwardly like a First Nations or an Indigenous person, you might be treated like with less respect. You might not be believed. If you're having a problem, you could be dismissed and basically not get the standard of care because, you know, Canada has spent so much time and such a long time like ingraining into people's heads, hearts, and minds that we are not human beings, right? Or we don't deserve the same. And like, how do they do that? They left out the entire history of what actually happened, right? They leave us out of their history books in public schools. Like they talk about this land like it only started when Canada started, you know, and they talk about us as people that were conquered and people that struggle and people that are sort of barely hanging on to life. They don't talk about us in a way that makes others feel like we're deserving, you know. So it's like the unwritten stuff that most people suffer. And one of the things I've come to realize, and this applies to everybody, it's like if you are in a bathroom by yourself and you don't wash your hands because no one's watching, it's not, you know, whatever. And it's like that same mentality, because there is no safeguards for First Nations people in any area of society. It's like there's no accountability. So like if an emergency doctor says, oh, there's nothing wrong with you, go home, he knows inherently that he'll never be held accountable if he misses something, because the likelihood of that person having the finances or the power or the support to come back and make a fuss is quite small, because First Nations people are often so much in their own chaos of life that you know, they just don't have the resources to like hold people accountable in hospitals or, you know. So, and I hate to say that, but that's what I've been seeing in my practice, is that if you feel like someone is disposable or that you don't have to be accountable, your care isn't going to be as good. And there's no way to measure that, right? There's no way to measure those things. But that is what happens to our community members, like day in, day out, in all kinds of systems, but mostly the healthcare system, which is where they suffer a lot of harm. And like I have real examples of this. When I was in the shelter, there was a gentleman staying there who was like very unwell. He was complaining of a headache. He was sort of just like laying on the floor. I kept getting reports from the staff that like something was wrong. He was complaining of a headache, and he ended up walking over to the emergency department, being seen, getting sent home back to the shelter the following day. So I walk into the shelter and I think, oh, good, he was assessed. The doctor saw him. I'm sure everything was taken care of. And I assumed that my physician colleague in the emerge did the right thing and that this guy was taken care of. And I didn't even go check on him because he had an interaction there. A few hours later, I like so I have access to log into the emergency, like all of the hospital systems locally, and read reports. So I read his report from the emergency room. And the report just said, you know, so-and-so is here complaining of a headache. You know, I checked him over. He looks fine. He really thinks he has head lice, but I don't see any head lice. But, you know, I'll give him some head lice treatment just to make him feel better, and I'll give him an antibiotic just to make him feel better, and he'll feel better if I do that. And he, you know, and that's what the report said. And then a few hours later, one of the workers from the shelter came to get me. Dr. Boshart, you have to see this. You have to come see this. And I was like, see what? And I went to see this gentleman, and it was like the worst head lice infection I've ever seen in my whole life. Like it was like moving. There were so many of them, thousands and thousands. And not only that, but once we were able to cut all his hair off, he had abscesses all over his scalp. His lymph nodes in the back of his neck were golf balls because he had such a bad infection. And I thought, I was just so disappointed in that moment, because there's this documented legal document visit that says verbatim, I do not see any head lice. He does not have head lice. He has no infection, and he can be discharged.
Wow.
So,
And what kind of distance was this diagnosis provided by? As in, did they even see the guy? Were they in the same room?
I asked him, I said, he wears a toque all the time to cover his head, because he's obviously had this for months and months and months and months and months. I said, did he take your hat off? He said, I think he did. I said, did he even look at your head? He said, I don't know, I think so, but I could tell he really didn't want to be there, and he didn't really want to help me. And I was like, so I don't know why these things happen in our systems. And, it took me, actually, I called the emergency room, and I was gonna have some words with this physician, but I didn't, because I said, no, just like take a deep breath, do what the patient needs, right? I took care of the patient, and that took a lot for him. Like, we couldn't shave his head because it was so infected. We could cut the hair as short as we could. We couldn't put head lice cream on because his skin was all open. Like, it was just a process. It took like a week or two to get him treated, and we had to go with oral medications for head lice, which you don't really hear of, but it exists, which basically just puts the medicine in the bloodstream so that the lice then eat the blood and die instead of topically. So I've never looped back to this doctor, but I still have that report, and I took photos, and my intention is one day to ask this man about this interaction, once all of my emotions around it settle down, because like, I know people don't change if they don't see us as human beings, and they don't want to interact with us, and that's just going to make him more angry if I attack him about it. But that is just one example of many that I see when it comes to First Nations people, especially those who are in socially difficult circumstances, like homeless or struggling with addictions. Like, the more layers, the worse they're treated by the health system, and that's all it is.
Oh, I'm so interested in reading your book, which will hopefully come out, which talks about all of these things, because I am nowhere near where you are. I have no idea of the kind of situation that you and First Nations people face on a daily basis. And I'm sitting here, I'm horrified as you're telling your story, head in hand scenario. I mean, that goes completely against the Hippocratic Oath in every way.
Absolutely, yeah.
I mean, why do these people qualify to provide healthcare if they don't give a damn about the people they're supposed to be serving? I don't understand that at all. And as for them treating people as though they're not even same level human beings, that the only person there who is not the same level human being is the doctor.
That's right. Yeah, it's a strange, healthcare is a strange monster. And like, on a personal anecdote, I myself sought out emergency care in the last few weeks. And even me, I told them I was a physician, and I feel like somehow if I just say that, at least I'll feel like I'm safe. But it was still like, I would say, pretty poor. But I think that the systems are, this is what everyone just keeps saying. We don't have enough staff. There's too many patients. Everyone's burnt out. So you are just like a number in a room. Like, they don't really even have the emotional or capacity to see you as a person, because they just can't, because they're just too busy and too drained. And that is how it felt for me too. I just felt like everything around me was just like I was just alone, right? In this busy place where everyone is just like on their way to the next thing. And you're kind of pushed around, and go wait here and go wait here, and then bye. There was one individual in the triage that I actually felt like connected to me or cared. So I was grateful for that one person. And I am like a well-educated, like well-dressed, like groomed doctor. And even I felt like that I wasn't important. So I can only imagine how it feels when you visibly, have a visible minority, or you're, not well groomed or not well dressed or homeless, or, whatever. It's just going to be that much worse, I feel. So people are living in boxes, and I mean, like, not literal boxes, but a lot of the people providing the service they live in a world that's so sheltered, and they, it's like I don't know, they can't have compassion or empathy anymore for others. I just don't get it. But
A few years ago, I recall some of the horrors came out of some areas of Canada where they had discovered these mass graves of children around these schools that had been created supposedly to educate First Nations people, but essentially they just carried out some kind of mini genocide on these particular communities. And then they cancelled Canada Day. The whole country was horrified. But when I hear these kinds of stories coming out, then, okay, so nothing changed. Okay, we cancelled Canada Day. That's it. Move on. Next up. And so I don't get it. I mean, what more do you need to do?
In my, like, this is again my opinion, but like, Canada continues to be guilty of genocide towards First Nations. And in the way that, like, if you look at what genocide is and all of the aspects of genocide, it's ongoing through removal of children from their families, through not allowing the basic necessities, right? Housing, clean water, access to food. So, like, they're still doing it. Incarceration rates of Indigenous First Nations women and men are through the roof. So, like, all these different systems continue to sort of commit that, but it's not outright. They're not outright like standing us up and shooting us. So, and they also propagate a narrative like they're giving us everything, like all, like the overall narrative in the country is that, like, Indigenous First Nations people get everything handed to them. The government's always throwing them money, but they just mismanage it. And this is what everyone just believes who doesn't actually know First Nation people. So I spend a lot of time sitting in groups with other people who have no experience with First Nations, and I just tell stories. of real stories of my own, and they just are all like in awe. They just don't know. They can't comprehend. It's just you don't walk in those shoes until you walk in those shoes, or you listen to somebody who has. And I think it's not coincidental that like I'm an Indigenous doctor and I still can't be one with my community after 8 years. Like, that's not a coincidence. It's not for lack of trying. It's because, like, in my deep, I believe that, like, the overlying system still wants us to be dead and dying and still wants us not to succeed and still operates in that way in all of these little systems of minutia. And we're trying really hard to fight all of that right now in all, like, education, justice, social, like health, housing. Like, we're trying to find solutions and we're trying to find allies in the work to turn it around, right? It's slowly happening. It's just very slow.
I was going to say, referring back to your Twitter page, there is also reference to, you said, stay aware, Gilbert Chichu, the purpose of the Indian Act is to colonize Indian governance. Canada will keep trying to convert First Nations via tactics that starve them financially until the same policies with different titles trick them into giving up their treaties for municipalities. And that's very much in keeping with what you're saying. If I were not following you, I would not have known anything about this. But also I live, in a different continent. Is there really no interest outside of the immediate community where people are taking this story up, talking about it, developing awareness of it, trying to help, trying to show their understanding and compassion? Is there nothing there outside of the First Nations community immediately to try to do something?
There is. It's just we're so recent from the, like 500 years of active genocide, right? We're just coming out of that. We're not out of it. It's still happening in a different way. I always have so much compassion for my own First Nations community because we are the descendants of all of that trauma. And, my own mother went to residential school, right? So a lot of us, and I don't like to speak for everyone, but I'll just say So me sitting here today in this chair, in order for me to be well enough to challenge all of this at political levels, right? Like, first, I have to be in a situation where I have all the things I need. Like, I have to have water and safety and food and security and like a relatively stable family life and have learned my rights, right? And have understood them at all those levels. And then I have to take all of that and enact it into change. And there are people out there that are doing this in that way, but there's still lots of our community members, relatives of mine, family, friends, like, who still are in their own internal struggles, like they're just trying to survive, they're in survival mode, right? When you're in survival mode, you're not doing that high level change. You can, some of it can be violent resistance, right? But thankfully we don't operate that way as a people, obviously unless threatened with violence, but it's not very difficult to like confuse an entire nation with like paperwork and legal jargon and get them to sign over their rights and say, oh, we're going to give you all kinds of money to support your community, right? Like, when people are in that and they're just desperate for resources, like, governments can take advantage. So unfortunately that is happening actively, and I pray about that every day, because at the end of the day everything on paper, treaties and documents are what the colonial system relies on, right? So I'm hoping not everyone signs all of our rights away. But and to your point, on the other side of things, there are settlers here in Canada, immigrants here in Canada, displaced people here in Canada, who are those good allies, who want to improve things for our communities. But we're like, I feel like we're pretty early in that stage. Like they're just starting to try to understand like what an ally is and what that looks like. Because I don't think I have actually met somebody yet who like embodies that. There's a lot of great people that are curious. They want to understand and they want to know what to do to help, but then they realize, if I action this to help First Nations, like I'm going to face consequences in my own personal life, from the system or from those around me that don't. So it's like being an ally is not easy because you can face your own losses, and it's about power, right? You have to give up some of your power, and yeah, that's a tough place, but they're out there. They are out there.
I don't want to suggest something that you've already done and thereby make out that I'm such a fountain of knowledge and so on. But I mean, workshops, engagement events, and so on, trying to educate local people how can they become a supporter and so on. These activities, I imagine, are taking place. Are they developing in a certain direction, which you could say, okay, we can see the success of these things, or is there some other kind of input that perhaps needs to occur?
It's a good question. For a long time, there's been like what we call, I think it was first called, I don't know what it was called, Indigenous Cultural Safety Training or Aboriginal Cultural Humility Training. There's a lot of like organized organizations or institutions. What they have been doing is building this curriculum for their staff people to go through that, teaches the true history of the country, from contact and all of the treaties, and so all the historical stuff, current sort of state of affairs. I don't know though. I don't know if they're successful. I think obviously it's that background is, it depends how you interact with the material, right? In anything. Some people, it's like, did they really go through the material? Did they just press play and walk away? I don't know. Was there any active engagement or discussions when they learned all of this? So I think at the least, those kinds of things at least can start someone down their path to understanding. So those courses and things are available in all kinds of different spaces and places. Different universities offer courses, different organizations offer free courses to just do the like didactic learning about these things, historically speaking and systemically speaking. For me, like the best learning is like that real human interaction, like relationship building with a person that comes from these communities. So, and that's real action, right? It's, I can sit in a room and give a lecture to 200 physicians and offer myself as a coffee dater. If you really have nobody in your life who's from a First Nation community locally ever, if the only person you interact with as a First Nation person is your patient, like that's a problem, because then it's still a power differential. So like it has to be real, tangible relationships with people for you to learn from them, I think. So, the more we can get our own people to get into healthcare spaces and justice spaces and be those equal colleagues, right? It's going to take a lot of time. I realize that, but like relationships do take time. They take time, they take effort, they take dedication, and that really is the true relationship building. Like you have to go into the communities, you have to meet the people, you have to meet them again and again and again. And and find someone that can teach you and be willing to learn and listen and say, maybe this is important, right?
Yeah. Dr. Boshart, you've been very generous with your muted criticisms of some of the people, some of your colleagues in the medical profession. I don't believe that all of them deserve that generosity. But your next steps, sadly, you're going to have to empty out the shelter from where you're operating. Do you have plans already in place for what comes thereafter? I presume you need some time to gather your thoughts, perhaps bring a circle of people together who are willing to undertake some positive action. Do you have some ideas in that direction?
Oh, yeah, I do. The great thing about the fact that I've been sharing this in like large groups is that there's lots of people who have had great suggestions, and I know they're all out there sort of like waiting for me to say like what I need, right? Next steps for me is like really enacting that healthcare sovereignty. And according to the United Nations, Indigenous individuals, and I posted this on my Twitter feed and I reposted it. So healthcare sovereignty means that we should have decision making and processes that service our communities, right? So healthcare service delivery, we should be able to choose how that looks and how it operates, and as a sovereign nation. So yeah, so I am hoping, and like, prayers have gone out, and it's like, there's an acre of land in my own First Nation that is possibly coming to me very soon. And it all starts there, right? You need land, and land is why we got in this problem in the first place, right? So if I can have a piece of land to just start establishing a small space that's in my First Nation and protected by all of that sort of interference, and it can just be my space and I make the decisions, then I think we could get somewhere. And the beautiful thing is, there's already partners at sort of tertiary hospital levels, leadership in hospitals locally, the local Ontario health teams, all the leadership levels are like, what do you need, right? And so if I can just get this land, then I can say, I'll get a business plan together with all my expenses, and I'll say, well, here's what I need. What part of it can you help out with, right? Because at the end of the day, it's going to keep my community members out of your emergency rooms. It's going to keep them out of your hospital beds, and it's going to build the health of our community. So it's worth it, right? It's worth it. And they all know that. So I'm excited for the next step. And I'm just, in our way, I was told, and I do truly believe, like, all this is going to happen. It's just a matter of when, and I just have to, be patient and endlessly patient. And, I always say it's like a lifelong dream, right? So, by the end of my days on this earth, if I will have seen this happen and function and help the community, like I will have, like, that is my purpose. So I'll be happy. And I'm still young, so we got lots of time. And if for some reason my life is not as long as I think it's going to be, like, I hope someone will take it over move it forward. And so, yeah.
Dr. Boshart, this fan of yours is hopeful that you will live way beyond living out that dream.
Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah. Yeah, and if other people have ideas or simply want to reach out and speak with you or communicate with you, I will add your Twitter handle in the notes
fine.
as well. Yeah, and also people in Council Bluffs, if you want to reach out to Dr. Boshart, feel free to do so. Yeah, Doctor, what can I say? I hope that when we speak again, that it won't be too far away, but then also that you'll be able to fill the episode up with positive developments. That would be great.
Absolutely. Yes. I look forward to it. I will keep you up to date with when you can wrangle me down, right?
Yeah, as you know, I'm a bit of a dog with a bone when it comes to trying to get back to you. But I will always sort of come back to you. If I don't hear from you, I'll be like, Dr. Boshart, remember me.
And
But
everyone keeps saying, when are you writing this book? And I'm like, you know what? I should just start voice recording every time I do anything and then just get someone to write it all out. And there you go. You have a book. That's probably what I'm going to do.
Yeah, I'll definitely look forward to reading it. So, yeah, Dr. Boshart, thank you very much for your time. It's always a pleasure. And I wish you sincerely all the very best. And yeah, let's speak again soon.
Thank you so much for having me.
Mike.
Take care.
Two and Mike.